So 你叫什么名字？
我叫林林，
你在哪儿出生？
我在中国沈阳出生，
你几岁？
我29岁。
你在爱文世界学校做什么？
我是小学2、3和4年级的中文老师。
你喜欢纽约吗？
我很喜欢纽约。
谢谢。Now the English questions.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
No.
Okay. Did you have any family in China or in America before you left?
Yes, I had family. My father is in China or in the States before I came to the States.
Did that influence your decision to come here?
I didn't really have a decision. It wasn't me that made the decision. My parents came, and therefore I came as well.
So what is your favorite type of food? And did it change? Did you have a favorite food and Chinese food and now is
I think I like all sorts of Chinese food, and I dislike the same kind of Chinese food as compared to when I was younger.
Was your immigration process hard?
Well, no, because I was under the age of 18 when my parents became citizens, so therefore I was naturalized citizen.
So you didn't have to wait a long time for visas and stuff like that?
No, my father came to the States in 1986 as a student on a student visa.
Mm-hmm.
My mom came in 87 on also not quite a student visa but a family visa. And then I came in 88 also with a family visa. So we came, I guess, consecutively 1 year after the other person. And in 1989, there was the student riots in Beijing. So a lot of students were persecuted in China. And so the United States at that time said, if you're a student from China on a student visa, then to protect you, the Americans or the U.S. would give you, or you could apply for a green card. So my parents applied for a green card, and when they got their green card, I got my green card. So since I was under the age of 18 at the time. And then 5 years after you get your green card, then you can apply for citizenship.
So how old were you when you came to America?
I was 5.
Was it hard living on your own?
Oh, I wasn't
5
really
years
living on my own. I was with my parents.
No, before you came. Well,
Oh.
they were here and you weren't.
When they were here when I was there. You know, to be honest, I don't really remember. But I did live with my grandparents, so my grandparents on my mother's side or my grandparents on my father's side. So I was with family.
Okay. What do you miss about China the most?
I mean, it's been so long since I left. I mean, I've been in the U.S. for most of my life, you know. It's not what I miss, it's who I miss more. My grandfather passed away last summer, so if he were still alive, would be someone that I really miss because he raised me when I was a kid. And now whenever I go back to China, I feel very conflicted. I mean, it's a place that I see a lot of people that look like me, that I should feel some type of closeness or something with, but I don't, you know, and the way that life is, you'll soon see, is just there's so many things, petty little things daily that you have to kind of fight for, and that's just so exhausting. You know, it's like, you know, you think that people would, you know, assume that if you were waiting in line for the bathroom or waiting in line, you would form a line in a relatively orderly fashion, but not everybody does that. They just kind of all rush up, and it's like, dude, it would be so much more organized if everybody waited in line and everybody went in. But, so there are a lot of these kind of things that I notice more comparing to my life here. I mean, New York is pretty crowded on the subway, rush hour. It's pretty bad, but imagine the worst day here is something you have to deal with every day there.
How often do you return to China?
I used to return about once every 1 or 2 years when my grandfather was still alive. And he also spent many years with us when I was growing up in California. But last year I went back because I took my students from my old school to China. So I went there twice last year, and the third time for my grandfather's funeral. But now, I mean, I'd like to take my boyfriend to China because he's never been there and he's not Chinese. But aside from that, I mean, there's no motivation for me to go back, you know, aside from just vacation. I mean, I say that 2 weeks is my romance with China. I have to kind of leave. I kind of get tired of being there for 2 weeks. The food is great, though.
So, do you have any friends still in China?
I went back to China for 3 years when I was 8. So between the age of 8 and 11 or 12, I was in China.
Were your parents there with you when you
No,
went?
just me, with my grandfather, which is why I'm so close to him, right, on my mother's side. And I went to elementary school there. So I went to 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. So I still have some friends that, I mean, believe it or not, we still kept in touch. We found each other somehow after so many years. And I think when I was in college, I went back for a summer, and they were around, and we kind of got together. I mean, it was really nice because you can see their face, and you recognize them because they still have the face that they had when they were 9 or 8. But they're adults now. So it was really nice to get together, and although you don't really know them so well anymore as a person or what they're doing now, you still feel a sense of closeness, you know, and you still kind of reminisce about when you were at school, sort of memories you had, and so many of them are actually abroad in New Zealand, in Canada, in Europe, everywhere. People who could send their kids out to be educated.
Do you keep in touch with them?
Some of them I still do, and when I go back, because, you know, imagine having a hometown, but then everybody who grew up went to college in a different state or different city. It's hard to, when you go back to that same hometown, for everybody to be there still.
Yeah.
But, yeah, there is a similar, thing similar to Facebook. It's called Student Book. So where people can register their school, their grade, and the year they graduated, and then have kind of like a homeroom or a class kind of profile, and everybody who's in that class can like post things and stuff.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the relationship between the U.S. and China right now?
God, well, that's a really big question. Like any relationship, I'm sure it's complicated. I'm sure one side tells a certain story and the other side tells another story. I think, and like any relationship, if you communicate more, I mean, there's cultural differences, right? To begin with, there's a language barrier, right? So there's a lot of things where people are like, why are Chinese people like that? It's not so much why, it's so much like, this is the way they are, and if you want to do business or have a relationship with them, you have to compromise. And so I feel like it's just to have more programs where we teach Americans Chinese and Chinese kids English certainly helps, right? Because you learn a lot about the language and culture, and that people in both countries are not going to grow up so ignorant about the other, and they're not so foreign anymore. I mean, before people had to take boats and like, oh my God, China is the Far East, you know? But now people go there all the time for business.
Yeah.
Right? Whether they speak Chinese or not. I mean, that's where the business is.
My dad's like, he works and he travels a lot, and he goes to China like at least once a year.
Yeah. Does he speak Chinese?
No.
No. So when he goes there, it's difficult for him, but I'm sure he's learning, not always because he wants to, but because the business is what's motivating
Like, he'll come
him.
back and I'll be practicing my Mandarin, doing my Mandarin homework, and he'll be like, oh, I know what that means. And I'm like, how? And he's like, because of my last trip in China, I heard people talking about it. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay.
That's great. So, I mean, I guess I don't know if I answered your question, but I feel like it's a difficult, complicated relationship. There's many different faces or areas. I think in general, I feel like if the two countries can collaborate more and do more things. I don't really know what the goal is for the Chinese government and how they see the relationship with the U.S. and vice versa. Is it like, I'm going to use you and you can use me and we're kind of even? Or is it like, I will support you, I will back you up in case there's a crisis? Taiwan is a very big, I want to say either a pebble or a thorn in China's shoe. Here's this tiny little island country who is like, well, I'm independent. Not everybody in Taiwan feels this way. But there are people who say, I'm completely independent of China. I'm not Chinese, I'm Taiwanese. And they have a lot of national pride, which is something that you should understand, right? People have their own pride for their country. But the U.S., as far as I know, has said that if there is a war, if China attacks Taiwan, then the U.S. will support Taiwan. So that creates, a tension between China and the U.S., right? It's like, well, Zach, if you're going to fight with Alma, I'm going to support Alma. And then you're like, well, what about me? I thought we were friends too. So if China is doing a lot of business with the U.S. and Taiwan is also doing business with China and the U.S., can you see how this is like it's like a relationship where I like someone and someone likes somebody else and that other person likes somebody else. So it's just like a triangle. It's complicated. So how do you resolve these kind of issues on the larger political scale? I don't know.
Yeah.
Never a poli-sci major, so I don't know. It's very complicated, I would assume.
Were you ever discriminated against, or did you find it harder in school or harder to get a job because you're Chinese?
I guess I was very sheltered in a way that I lived either on the East Coast or the West Coast, where there was an incredibly large population of Chinese immigrants compared to the Midwest or the southern states and so forth. I don't think I was. I mean, I don't remember ever being bullied or anything because of my race, but I do remember that last year or 2 years ago as an adult, I was walking on the west side and this man, a white man, stepped on me on accident. And then he, instead of apologizing, basically cussed at me and was just, but the thing is, I don't think that's so much like the white versus the Chinese, but it was just that one man who, was a bad fruit, a bad nut. He was crazy. I mean, I don't think that when you step on someone that should be, that's the appropriate defensive kind of an attitude. But I feel very fortunate that I have grown up either, in California where there are a lot of Asians, and Asians are more or less accepted into the society and the communities. And in New York City is so diverse, right? So I've been lucky to not feel a lot of discrimination, nor have I been discriminated against because of my heritage or my background. I mean, certainly not really for employment because I'm a Chinese teacher. If you're going to discriminate towards someone who's going to be a Chinese teacher, how are you supposed to fill that position, right?
Do you think that's a normal experience, or do you think...
I think there's two things that sort of help. The fact that this is the 21st century, right? It's the times is one thing. If I were someone in the 1900s during the war or during some other kind of incident, I think there was a lot more discrimination and racism and things like that happened. I feel like now, more or less, people in a lot of different places are pretty accepting. They're curious, and that curiosity may come off as that they're really that they're discriminatory towards you, but I think they're just curious. I think that people are just naturally kind. No one's just a mean person from the bone. I feel like, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's wishful thinking. Yeah.
Was it hard for you to assimilate, learn the language?
For me, I guess not, because I had never learned English prior to moving to the States when I was 4 or 5. I don't really remember this, but my mom says that it took about 9 months for me to be, fluent. There was I think when I was I was just kind of stuck into the classroom, and she told the teacher if she raises her left hand, she means she's hungry. If she raises her right hand, she means you need to go to the bathroom. So I think there was some type of code between the teacher and I, but I really wish I could find that teacher that taught me when I was young and kind of talk to her about it, because I honestly don't remember very much.
And what are some of the differences between American culture and Chinese culture? And are there really big differences?
Can you be specific? I mean, that's just like asking a really broad question. Like, what's the difference between Zach and Atlas? It's like, oh, so broad, so different, but so similar in many ways. Can you be more specific? Are you talking about culture? Are you talking about language? Are you talking about
culture,
people?
I guess.
Culture. Yeah, I mean, Americans hug people that they've met or not met, right? At least they're like, hey, how are you? But Chinese people usually shake hands is sort of the older generation type thing. But now young people hug too. But I feel like a lot of American culture influences Chinese culture and not so much the other way around. Not because one is superior than the other, but because American culture via music, via pop culture is just so much in all of the world. It influences so many different cultures. I mean, you can see American music videos, American singers on every television set, I think, in any country. So I feel like when you have this kind of influence or influx of culture coming in, the good comes in and the bad comes in as well. So I feel because of technology, I feel there's just such a easy communication between different cultures that's shared via the internet. But yeah, of course, there are very, very, very distinctively different cultures between the U.S. and China, and even within China, and even within the U.S. Right? East Coast people, West Coast people are different. People in Florida, people in Georgia behave differently than people in Texas. So I mean, I think the question has to be more specific, and in order for you to be specific about the question that you're pondering, that you want to research, I think you have to go there, which is what you're doing. And you have to see, maybe in a similar situation, how people in China react to a situation that could be replicated or in the same here in the U.S., right? Like when you have someone you don't know, when you meet someone you don't know, what do? Maybe that could be one. Or something as simple like when you share a meal with someone, what are some of the table manners, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
do you think those differences are disappearing? Because lots of people are saying that China is very, very similar to the U.S. and that, or some parts of it, not all of it,
right?
Definitely.
I think
but
in
the
more,
big cities,
right? Exactly. That's exactly what I was going with. I think in the more urban cities, in an urban setting where everybody has an iPod or an iPhone or an iPad or an something. In that sense, it's very similar. But I feel like if you go a little bit off the beaten road to a more rural area, an area where not as many people speak English or have access to the internet, I mean, life has been the way it is in China for hundreds and thousands of years, which is kind of nice because you go there. It's like seeing an animal at a zoo versus seeing an animal in the wild. Are the animals the same? Yeah. Do they behave the same? Probably not. So I think I mean, if you live in one place for a period of time, I mean, for 2 weeks, I don't think you really can understand a society or a culture for 2 weeks unless you go back frequently every time for 2 weeks, which is, I encourage you to do that. But then you'll really see how things change. But in the city, anything you have here in the U.S., you'll have in China. Any beverage, any food you'll find here, you'll find in China. So what's the difference? But I feel like that's the way it is in a lot of countries. You go to Europe, it's very similar to the U.S. in some ways. Okay, architecturally different. Cities are older, towns look different. But besides the sort of that kind of a facade, people are more similar than they are different all over the world.
Thank you. 再见了，老师。
再见, Zach.